Yeah.
Okay, 3, 2.
3, 2, hit it!
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy on Sputnik Radio. Coming up on the show, we talk to Jan Scoyles of Goldcore.com. But first, this quote from American author Robert Byrne. Quote, democracy is being allowed to vote for the candidate you dislike least. It's worth remembering as Americans get set to vote for the number 1 and number 2 most hated candidates in U.S. electoral history. But as an investor and as a citizen, how does one hedge the dreadful inevitability that one of the 2 most hated presidential candidates in history will actually get the job? Stacey.
Yes, Max, this is quite important. Number 1 and number 2, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Actually, Donald Trump is more hated than Hillary Clinton, believe it or not. But that's why the race continues to be neck and neck. Now, of course, one of the reasons why people hate Hillary Clinton so much, it's quite obvious why they hate Donald Trump. But Hillary Clinton is her sort of elitist Wall Street kind of sleaze and corruption. And she famously gave all the speeches to Goldman Sachs for $675,000 for just 3 quite boring speeches if you read them. Well, they are in the news because Goldman Sachs says gold is a great hedge against politicians. Goldman Sachs head of commodities research, Jeff Curry, told CNBC's Power Lunch that it is good to own gold in our current political state. Quote, I always like to say gold is a great hedge against politicians, and we have a lot of political risk in the market right now, so gold has a strategic purpose.
Oh, yeah. Well, gold's always been a great hedge, going back hundreds of years, thousands of years. People keep 5 to 10% of their portfolio in gold. The question is, at what point do we increase that hedge allocation to 15, 20%, 25%, 50% due to not only hedge against political corruption and malfeasance, but as a hedge against economic apocalypse? I think that's the question of the day.
Now, every election season, of course, Americans always threaten to flee the country should their, I guess in this case, most disliked candidate win. And here's a headline that goes with this, using gold as a hedge against politicians. Well, there's one American who was captured in Bolivia this past week, American with 121 pounds of gold arrested in Bolivia. A 76-year-old U.S. citizen with more than 55 kilos of gold was arrested, and he also had a lot of silver. They said he had several kilos of silver. So he was caught. They're trying to see if he was money laundering or just an ordinary American fleeing the political risk that one of his most hated candidates would win.
Well, gold mules are everywhere, moving gold around for themselves, for other people. What's great in the 21st century is you've got digital gold with Bitcoin. This is not a show about Bitcoin, but it solves that portability problem that you have with gold. Gold is very, very heavy. Silver more so, 50 times heavier, per dollar. So still you need the ability to move it around, and there's where it can get cumbersome when you're crossing borders.
It's Double Down with Max and Stacy.
Oh, yeah, it's a new show on Sputnik Radio.
If you've ever carried a kilo or 2 kilo or whatever bar, they're quite heavy and big and substantial. So there is no better person, of course, to talk to about this than Jan Scoyles of Goldcore.com. She's over there in Dubai, which is kind of one of the global headquarters of gold trading. Jan Scoyles, is there enough gold in the world? Is there enough gold in Dubai to hedge against President Trump?
Wow. Well, I'm not sure if there's, Trump is an issue on his own. In terms of how much gold there is here in Dubai, very refreshing to be in an environment where people automatically understand gold. There's not the extra steps you have to take in order to explain to them. Unlike back in the UK, where because people aren't often encouraged to invest in gold, you have to kind of start from the beginning and explain to them why it makes sense to diversify your portfolio into gold or silver. It takes sort of someone like a Goldman Sachs to suddenly say, yeah, we should be looking at gold as a political hedge. And that people seem to be waking up now thinking, yeah, actually, maybe there is something we can be doing to protect ourselves against what may or may not happen in the US elections, whether or not we see it as the best or worst candidates. Whether or not there's enough gold, I believe there is enough gold. And I believe that we are looking at a more positive gold environment because there are more ways that you can be holding gold, storing gold, and of course, using that gold as well.
Jan, I'm looking at the price of gold against various currencies. It's made new all-time highs against the ruble, against the South African rand. And interestingly, it's making close to a new all-time high against the British pound. So this is, I think, crept up on folks here in the UK who have been ignoring gold, and yet it has done a fantastic job. Now, what is that telling us? Is it a political risk, an inflation risk? What do you think that's all about?
Well, I think what we're realizing, gold is actually really is kind of a hedge against ignorance in terms of what we don't know what's coming. And we use it as kind of a hedge against uncertainty. And that's, there's no better case for that right now in the West in terms of the UK, because of what we're seeing with Brexit. And you're right, looking at the charts at the moment for the sterling price of gold, it's fantastic to be looking at. We've all been sat here talking about why the price of gold isn't moving for the last few years. And this is very positive from a gold perspective. Coming from, a sterling background, it's depressing what's happening with the pound, but it's something that is a reflection of we are very uncertain about how Brexit will play out. And I think what it is also quite indicative of when we're looking in the UK is actually kind of quite how inward facing a lot of economies are coming now. We're all facing these problems that we see as our own problems. So Brexit, whether it's the US election if you're in the US, what's happening with Italy if you're in the Eurozone. So I think the overall, the gold price is very indicative of this situation we find ourselves in, where we're looking at quite a fractious setup. No one knows which way it's going to go. And not only does the UK not know how Brexit's going to play out, but it doesn't know what its role is going to be out in the wider global economy when everything is quite sort of tentative elsewhere.
Interestingly, in the United Kingdom, you often see on programs like BBC Newsnight, which is one of the BBC's flagship, news programs, they'll talk about gold and they'll talk about the price of gold, but they only mention it in dollars. They almost never refer to it in sterling. So many Brits actually don't understand what an amazing hedge it has been against the political risk of a hard Brexit, of a political class, a political party, the Conservatives, that don't seem to understand actually how they are even going to exit the European Union.
I read this absolutely fantastic line referring to gold the other day, in that it is the Kardashian of commodities, in that people look at gold a bit like we do the Kardashians, in that it's quite interesting to follow. They're nice to look at, but actually we don't really believe they have that big an impact on the economy, and they kind of comment on what is happening in the economy. And that does seem to be the general sort of viewpoint from the Western media. And we have seen that on Newsnight. I remember years ago when Max was on Newsnight, and someone had brought on a pile of gold into the studio. And I can't remember if it was Paxman interviewing you, but everyone was quite dismissive of this gold, particularly the kid that the Economist magazine had sent along. And yet, Stacey, you and I were talking about afterwards how in the green room, everybody was surrounding the gold. They were so interested in it. And yet the general media are just so dismissive about what's happening in gold. And that's because they don't relate it to the economy, to the currency that everybody is spending and they're earning and they're paying their taxes in that country that they're speaking to. British people cannot relate to something that's happening in a dollar price, because the majority of British people don't have much to do with the dollar unless they go on holiday to the US. So it's very, very difficult for them to make that connection of what the sterling price of gold means when it's not being talked about, and what that means for the actual sterling price.
Well, there's that theory of subjective value. So gold has value because humans think it has value. And in that green room at Newsnight after the show, and I believe it was Dan Knowles from The Economist, he had said on the program, live on air, with Jeremy Paxman was the host, and saying that gold has no value. It's just a relic. It's an artifact. And in the green room, which was filled with all these people who had attended Margaret Thatcher's funeral that day, once the suitcase filled with gold, and there was a security guard with it, once that was opened, it was amazing. It was almost like, some sort of religious moment where people just were drawn to the gold and couldn't stop touching it. Even Dan Knowles, who on air had said it had no value, he couldn't stop himself from touching it and just staring at it in awe.
He was a fetishist moment. Yeah, it's like that suitcase from Pulp Fiction where they open it up and it's glowing. They are all fascinated by it. So you're there in Dubai, Jan Scoyles. Of course, Goldcore is an Irish company. So what are you doing there? You are talking up Goldcore as a place to buy and sell gold, or what is going on?
Well, actually, my decision to be in Dubai is mainly for personal reasons. But being in Dubai is proving very beneficial from a gold perspective. And also, I've spoken to you guys before in terms of my interest in what's happening with blockchain. Blockchain's a very big deal here in Dubai at the moment. And I think what I'm finding hugely interesting about being in Dubai is how they are so much future-proofing what is happening in the infrastructure here, to some extent to the economy as well. And so I do see very promising things happening from a gold perspective. Time will tell whether a gold core will be involved in that as well. But, I'm very lucky in that I can work from wherever I am. And I'm particularly lucky that I find myself in sort of this kind of amazing hub that is gold at the moment.
I love that concept of future-proofing. They're future-proofing the infrastructure in their city, but also in terms of individuals and your investments, the topic is future-proofing, essentially hedging against political risk. And one of the political risks is the fact that banks are so powerful. They're so too big to fail. They're too big to jail. And because of that, we can expect during the next huge leg down, once that happens, is that as the Federal Reserve and all the essential banks of the world are already at 0%, we're already saturated with debt. What are they going to do? And one of those risks, potentially, as goldcore.com is talking about this week, is bail-ins. So how would gold protect you from a bail-in?
Well, we always say about, you should be your own central bank. So be in control of your assets that you've chosen to invest in. And the beauty about investing in gold is that it is, particularly through, the platform that is Goldcore, is that it is 100% legally yours. It's not pooled gold. It is your bar of gold. You can go to the vault. You can arrange for it to be sold. You can take physical delivery of that gold. And so the minute you buy that gold, it is your gold. Now, when you put money in a bank account, it's no longer your legal property anymore. And what we're seeing with bail-ins, we've already seen them in Cyprus, which was a small wake-up call for savers, but actually not enough for them to really be looking at how much money they have in their banks. It was a small wake-up call to realize actually their money was at risk. And yes, okay, there are deposit guarantee schemes, but that's already been reduced in the last 18 months. So how much of your money in the bank is protected has been cut down. And whereas gold, when you own gold, it's your gold. And so you can't have some directive, whether it's come from the EU, whether it's come from the Bank of England, to say, actually, do you know what? If that entity that's looking after your savings goes under, we're just going to take your money and we're going to use it to prop up that bank. And this is all coming from the rhetoric that bailouts are bad and bankers are bad. And so politicians are pushing this viewpoint of, don't worry, there won't be any more bailouts. They're pushing under this line through that actually bail-ins are better because the shareholders and creditors will instead support the banks. And this, of course, plays again to this sort of psychological attitude that shareholders are wealthy and creditors are wealthy. And actually they're not. They're the everyday people who have got their savings in the bank. And so we recommend that you have an allocation of gold in your portfolio. We've said in the past it'd be 5 to 10%. Recently, we put something up on the site saying possibly even up to 20, 25%, because when your gold is in an account with Goldcore, it cannot be touched. If something were to happen to Goldcore, heaven forbid, then your gold is still your gold and nothing can happen, unlike if you have your savings in a bank account.
Now, Jan, a couple of years ago when gold was making new all-time highs in dollar terms, we read about how in Dubai there were gold vending machines. So people can buy gold from a vending machine. Are those still around, or has some of the hype around gold kind of faded for the interim moment? But I'm just curious, have you seen a gold vending machine? Have you used one?
I haven't seen a gold vending machine here in Dubai. However, that might be, again, because of personal reasons, because my partner wasn't until last week that he actually let me go to the gold souk because he was worried I would end up spending too much. So maybe he knows where the gold vending machines are and has kind of purposefully kept me away from them. There is definitely a kind of far more positive attitude to gold here in Dubai. And when I did eventually get into the gold souk, it was packed. And, yes, it's mainly jewelry that's being bought there, but there are a lot of Pamp refinery bars being bought as well. So maybe the vending machines, I don't know if they've proved to be popular or not, but there's certainly this desire to, a bit like we were just talking about on Newsnight, to be picking up the gold and looking at it and inspecting it. And people here seem far more better informed about what they're looking for when it comes to gold. And maybe it just comes down to this, you need to have that extra step when you're buying gold directly. You don't want it from a vending machine, you just want to go to the gold dealer in the gold souk.
All right, well, that's it for this episode of Double Down with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert on Sputnik Radio. Thanks to our guest, Jan Scoyles of goldcore.com. Until next time, bye, y'all.